Hello and welcome back to the Festival of Discovery. I'm really glad today to be able to introduce you to two people who really know a lot about nature as a community space. I'm going to bring them on now and introduce both of them one by one. This is Karin Eyben from Garvagh Forest School. Hello, Karin.
Hi, Grania. It's lovely to be with you.
And to you. I'm just going to add Jenny in now too. Hi, Jenny. Do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hey everybody, I'm Jenny from the Buile Hill Mansion Association based in Manchester in the UK.
So we have Karin from Northern Ireland and Jenny from Salford in Manchester, England. Hello. I thought just if we wanted to start off, Jenny, and I'm just going to put Karin, if you don't mind, back into our green room and have a little chat with you, and then I'll bring Karin back after that, okay? So Jenny, I'm just going to unmute you, and if we could maybe have a little chat and find out, about your project and how you got started with it.
Yeah, great. I've been involved with the Mansion Association since 2018. Our group actually formed as a voice of the community. We'd found out that a proposal for houses being built in our local park had been put forward to save the mansion, which is a Grade 2 listed mansion seated in our local park. So that's how we first came around. We have got now the promise that the mansion's going to be open by 2024. So our group's massively changed and evolved. So we've done things like put a wooden sculpture trail around the park, created seating in a 200-year-old felled elm tree. And we're also restoring the mansion's farmer garden for the blind back into a functioning century garden for the local community, school and people to come and enjoy.
That's a lot. And, in terms of how you got started with that, was it that you saw the need or, was the opportunity presented in a different way? How did it start?
I have a fascination with heritage buildings and bringing buildings back into community use. So I visited the mansion when it used to be a mining museum. So 20 years ago, my memories of the mining museum are still quite vivid. And I wanted my son and to reopen this fantastic building in the local area again. And as we've sort of changed and progressed, understanding nature and outdoors and how that also ties in. So that's why our group sort of dynamics has completely changed.
And Jenny, obviously, you had that passion already, but I imagine a lot of people have a passion or they see a building or a space, a community space that is neglected or, just not being used to its full potential and walk past it, and think, oh, wish or imagine if we did this. What changed you from thinking about it to actually doing it?
I think it literally was when the news article came out, which said about a private developer had put a plan forward to build houses in the park, which would mean that the mansion would be saved. But then building houses in a Grade 2 listed park or taking away much needed green space was the thing that made me decide that I wanted to ensure that that didn't happen. But we also then wanted to bring the mansion back into life, but looking at different ways to do that.
It's quite powerful that you had the ability. Getting a little bit of feedback on the line there, Jenny. Apologies. I'm saying that it was good that you had the ability and the confidence to go forward with that. But for people who maybe don't have the knowledge, I know you have many years experience working in the charity and community sector. For those people who maybe don't have that, what would your advice be to them?
See, our committee, for example, we've got a range of different sort of specialisms and expertises. And I've got, before I started, very, very little knowledge of nature and gardening. I mean, I had to ask constantly when we first started the restoration whether something was a weed or a plant. So everybody's coming together, sharing skill sets. Everything that we do between us, we're learning different things. So as long as you've got a passion, follow your goal. You'll meet other people along the way that might have an area of expertise that you've not got that fits perfectly with you. And that's how we've grown, diversified, and why we're now doing what we're doing.
I'm just going to say, Jenny, as well, you sent me through some brilliant images of the activities that you take part in. What is it about the project in terms of bringing people together? I mean, is it easy, or, how do you get so many people involved?
It's kind of just, it was one of those things that we never knew how the group was going to change or grow. We'd done an initiative in lockdown called Buile Hill Tiny Village, and we'd literally Petra and Marketta from the committee had put tiny little houses around the park, so it gave a different dimension to families coming into the park. And then from that, we decided we wanted to create something more permanent, and that's how the sculpture trail came around. So the sculpture trail is actually made up of people's memories. So that there is 6 of our 7 sculptures, and each of those sculptures is related to somebody's memory of the park or the mansion. So for example, the elephant's head is because when the mansion was a natural history museum, there was a full-size stuffed elephant in there. So everything that we've got also has a sort of history and heritage element to it. So from then, again, the Garden for the Blind, that was created and came about because of a female mayor in the 1960s called Ellen Mallinson. And she'd visited a lot of blind institutes and was really taken aback by how people dealt with their disability. And she understood that people could only smell flowers, they couldn't see the beautiful flowers. So that's one of our weekly sessions there. That's the garden had been left for 21 years since the mansion had been closed. So we're restoring that back. People come along, we have things that all abilities and ages can do. And this is how we're really sort of growing. It's getting into winter now, but because we have 30 people that come along and it's massively beneficial for their mental health as well as everything else, our sessions will continue. And then the last project is the elm tree, which again has a historical element. So the elm tree stood next to the mansion, probably one of the eldest trees or the oldest tree in the park, and it was 200 years old, but succumbed to Dutch elm disease. And we said, please save us a piece, we want to do something. So this is one of our elm tree sessions where we have turned the felled elm into seating and restoring the area around it. So it's a nice sort of rest, relaxation and well-being area for people to enjoy in the park.
There's certainly there's a lot of creativity involved in that as well, isn't there? In terms of it, you mentioned earlier about the sensory garden and that your work is going to continue through the winter. I think a lot of community projects stop their activity outside in the winter time. What is it that made you willing to continue? Because I think that's an important difference.
I think we always worry about the Great British weather. And since we've been doing weekly sessions since April, both midweek and weekly, we've only had to cancel one session because the weather was so bad. If it's been we've had a lot of rain, we've always continued the session, but we've changed it. So instead of causing more damage by going and standing all over the ground, we'll Pete Sims, who's our horticulture expert, will do a question and answer session, because the thing is, for us, it's also really important that we're upskilling and empowering our volunteers. So we've also done free first aid training with the British Red Cross, and we've done Henshaw's visual impairment awareness training. And so the question and answer session, it's also teaching people about plants and what's in the garden. So if the weather's too bad to actually garden, we'll do other things as well. We also have we became street champions with the local council. So every week alongside our session, we have litter picking equipment. So people can come along and litter pick just while they're in the park at the same time we're there. And then on Sunday, we're taking part in the big hedgehog sort of litter pick. So that's a more focused litter pick on that day. So I just think it's so important. I think as we've gone on and the sessions have got more people turning up, we've got 30 people every week that are enjoying each other's company as well as being out in nature. So for us, it's one of the things that we can't stop. I think it's so important for that nature and mental health for people that it'll definitely continue.
Okay, I'm just going to bring Karin back in and then just heard of the conversation. Hi, Karin, thanks for coming back. Jenny, I'm just going to pop you back into the green room, and then after this, we're going to come together again and answer some of the questions that are coming through on Facebook Live, and also a few that I have myself as well. Maybe you'll have some for each other. So just going to pop you back to the green room for now. So Karin, tell us a little bit about Garvagh Forest School.
So first of all, a little bit about Gava. So Gava is a small rural town in County Derry, Londonderry, with a catchment area around the town. And the forest is a 600-acre forest in the centre of the town, and very much part of the history of Gava, which in Irish means rough field. So that's the old name of the town. Gava People's Forest project started about 5-6 years ago when Gava High School closed, and that was a great sense of loss and bereavement for the town, and that triggered a whole process of looking and noticing about the land that the high school was on. And then that conversation meandered out into the forest that surrounded the high school, and that started a focus on what is the value of this forest for ourselves as people, for our communities, for our relationships, and what if we noticed that value and built on it? What could we grow that would contribute to well-being, to community, and to relationships? So that was the beginning 5-6 years ago.
And 5 or 6 years is not a long time in some cases, but actually in a project like this, you can make such a massive difference. What kind of difference has it made to the people of Garvagh?
Probably that's a good question to ask the people of Garvagh. But I suppose we've had different strands to the project. So we've had a forest school strand that's been a relationship with 6 primary schools and 3 preschools over the last 5 years. And part of that has been thinking about how we do education and learning differently. And the story at the beginning that I remember is when a teacher looking at a child out in the forest with sheer amazement on their face because the child was behaving so differently than they normally do within the 4 walls. So that's been one strand. We've also had a relationship with the health centre over the last couple of years, and that's been about how do we improve our health and well-being outside in the forest, and the health centre actually borders the forest. So just starting to connect people to the forest as a place of well-being. We've had different community events using arts and culture, and being in the forest helps you see things differently, each other differently, and music in the forest and turning things upside down. So there's a lot of creativity that can grow in ourselves. And we've also done adult learning and education. So we've tried things that often happen within 4 walls to take them out in the forest, and how does that feel, and how do people experience that differently? Okay. I think just to add, I think one of the key things that has been the forest has been well loved and used for hundreds of years for different purposes. And the Gava People's Forest project was around moving from individual use to community care. So if we work together as people, how does that help look after the forest in a much more sustainable way? And what does that do to our own relationships as a community?
It's interesting too you say that, because when we think about community, we often think about our villages, our towns, and our cities, our streets. And actually, place-based community can often be around somewhere that you love, and that could end up being your beach or your forest or your local park in Jenny's case. I'm just going to bring Jenny back in, but my thoughts on that are very much that sometimes the streets don't necessarily inspire someone the same way as a place that they really love, like a forest. So you can really connect and bring people together in a way that you maybe can't do the same for those that are not inspired by their urban setting.
And I think there's another really interesting thing there, Grania, around how do we define our community. And I think our biggest challenge with climate change and biodiversity loss is that we start understanding our community as incorporating the rest of the natural world. So how do we kind of expand our sense of community to include the rest of the natural world with our streets and people?
Yeah, so then we become, I suppose, we adapt to a different way of life as well because it's integrated into the norm.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring Jenny back in again. I'm getting used to this technology now, Jenny. Apologies earlier on, it was back and forward. So we've had a few questions via our Facebook Live. One of them, going right back to what you were saying, Jenny, touches on art. And I know that art plays a big part in Garvagh Forest activity as well. But someone was asking about the sculptures and, how you came to create those and go about it.
We got community fund, National Lottery Community Fund. We had a very, very tight budget. We wanted to put in as many sculptures as possible. So the first thing that we did, we have about 4,000 followers across social media, and we went to our followers and said, please share your memories regarding the local area or the park and the mansion. So some of the sculptures, like I say, are linked to that. The strange one is an otter. The reason that we have an otter is because the first otter was photographed in the River Irwell in December 2019. So that's a really massive step forward to sort of show how the rivers are becoming less polluted and becoming much clearer. And it's a part of today's history moving forward. The reason there's 6 sculptures there and we have 7 is because we work really closely with a local company called Kids Planet Nursery, and they very kindly paid for a 7th sculpture. We then found a local chainsaw artist called Mike Burgess that had worked quite a lot in the local area, and we commissioned Mike to create the 7 sculptures for us.
So your artist was in fact a local artist and craftsperson as well then. Someone asked earlier on who your artist was too, so it's good to know that. If you do have his details, it would be lovely to share those later on too for other people who are inspired and are nearby. I think it is really important to connect in with the people who are local trades as well, particularly because they have a real love and sense of affinity with that part of nature and that, that part of the local area. Karin, you guys have used art as a way to connect people as well, haven't you?
We have, as Jenny was speaking, it just triggered a memory. We used to recognize, I suppose, the seasonal changes because Gava is a rural farming community. And we often commemorated or recognized the winter solstice. And one year we had the Battle of the Holly King and the Oak King, which is an old battle and that is fought out every year. And at the winter solstice, the Oak King always wins because actually the light is returning after the shortest day. And in the summer, the Holly King wins because the days are drawing too. So we had this massive interactive battle, and then the families and the children kind of came behind the 2 kings, and it was a whole performance of music and drama and storytelling that was quite powerful in terms of just as a farming community, the change of the seasons are deeply ingrained in how we kind of grow our crops. We did a couple of years ago, we've used the lost words quite a lot in terms of the publication.
The lost words, yeah.
Yeah, the lost words. And we And that's a sense that we are using our relationship with the rest of the natural world, and we're using our language. So we literally took a number of species in the forest and created a sculpture, a moving sculpture through the forest. And the words were hanging on the trees, and people walked through the words and picked out words and letters. And it was very moving in the sense of people were physically grasping the letters and the words back and owning them around what was living in the forest.
And Tracy has actually asked about how you got people to, notice and connect back into nature, to get involved in the project. I think you've answered that in the sense that you looked at what interests people in the local area had, such as, rural farming, and obviously then tapped into some of what would be of interest to them to bring them in. Have you found that fairly easy, or has it, because sometimes you can have a fantastic project idea, or you can have a fantastic opportunity and just are really surprised that people don't show up. What has been your experience in that respect?
I guess no matter how many things one organizes, you have those moments of sheer and utter terror just before the event. You think, is anyone going to turn up? I think we've had events that 2 or 3 people have turned up, and we were hoping 50, and then we've had things that we expected 20, 30, and we've had 60. So you can never quite judge in terms of who turns up. We certainly, I think, have moved in our thinking. At the beginning, I think we felt under pressure that lots and lots of people should turn up, because that's kind of how measurement is done. Lots and lots of people equals good and kind of Fonda's eyes. And I suppose as we've kind of started to think much more deeply and intentionally about leave no trace, about the impact of our footsteps on the land, being much more, I think, clear and confident in terms of the carrying capacity of the land, or the carrying capacity of the forest, and what is appropriate in different seasons and in different parts of the forest. So it's been an interesting journey for us to move, I suppose. And to be honest, at the beginning, I was probably in that culture of an extractive relationship with the forest, which we kind of were the waters we swim in. We kind of use things and use the natural world to one which is actually really starting to understand much more deeply about our connections and what is possible.
I think that's I'm just trying to bring Jenny back in here at the moment, but it won't unmute you, Jenny, so you might need to do that yourself.
Yeah, there we go.
Great. I think Karin makes a really valid point there, around even just the topic being nature as a community space means that we think about nature as a way in which we can use it, when in fact we're talking now about an affinity where we have some kind of parallel support network between humans and nature supporting each other, as opposed to us using it. I imagine you're going to have something similar to deal with a sensory garden in particular, particularly from the point of view of the different people who may come to use that space, and the way in which nature might take over as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things as well that we want to try and do around the park as well. So, for example, the Billion Seed Challenge, sort of linked to COP26, where we're trying to get people to sprinkle seeds, and a lot of our volunteers are taking seeds out on their dog walks and sprinkling them. So I think for us as well now, we're starting to really look at the bigger picture. So as well as the sensory garden areas, and bringing people and learning about it, because I think sort of COVID definitely brought more people into the park, and it's sort of ensuring that people understand the importance now, and then continue the visits and understanding nature more, which is definitely one of our focal points.
That's a really good point, actually. It took a pandemic for us to notice what was on our doorsteps in many respects, maybe not notice it, but own it and look after it a little bit more. I just want to move the conversation a little bit further, because one of the things that I wanted to touch on as part of this interview was around nature as a space, because obviously there are a lot of activities that we do outside that you could potentially do indoors, but people have a different relationship with the activity and with each other sometimes when they're outdoors. Now, I know particularly there would be a lot of evidence around young people on the spectrum and people with disabilities feeling a connection to each other or being more relaxed when they're in a nature space. I just wondered, because obviously, Jenny, you've been talking about the sensory garden and working with a particular group of people. What has been your experience in that respect? Has it made a difference?
It's definitely made a difference. We have so many emails, comments, people reaching out to us that have been in to visit us, been into the space. It's massive. I think that's why we're growing so much and changing and diversifying to literally hit the need and meet the need for people that want to come in, understand about the garden, understand about nature, just like being outdoors. For example, the first aid training, we hired a room in a local community centre, but the training that we did with Henshaws, it was probably the worst weather. We had jugs trying to collect all the rainwater around the gazebos, but we held that in the garden because it was really important for us for our volunteers to understand the relevance, because it's the outdoor space. So we held the training course outside. So yeah, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah,
no, fine. I think it was a useful
we
point.
understand the importance of it, hence why we took the training course outside instead of inside like you would usually expect it to be.
Yeah. And I think I noticed that as well, because we do have a perception sometimes, for instance, that older people won't be able to be as, involved in a project if it's outdoors. And that seems to have been a long-term perception, particularly, with community activity and community projects. And yet over lockdown, I've particularly seen in my community, some of the older generation really, out there and supporting others and doing the litter picks and organising, the programs and things like that. Karin, what about yourselves? Sorry, I should say. I know that the Garvagh Forest School activity doesn't just take in the activity in Garvagh, it takes in the local villages and towns. And in fact, Vicky has been on Facebook and pointed that out to say, the Forest School really does reach beyond Garvagh. But what about, in terms of reaching people who maybe struggle with indoor spaces or struggle with busy spaces? What has been the what have you found?
Well, it's been an interesting one of the interesting projects that grew out of the first lockdown was a partnership with the social work team at the health centre, and we developed the Forest Families project. So families were invited or asked if they could come for a day or half-day play as a family in the forest. And it was doing a couple of things. One was giving the chance for a family just to get out of the four walls, particularly in lockdown and being so pressurized, to be with each other in a space of play, of relaxation. We had the hammocks up, we had a kind of a detective trail and games. So we were using one of, I think, the really interesting models we use quite a lot is Joseph Cornell's flow kind of process around kind of how to connect outdoors. So from the first stage is creating curiosity and enthusiasm for being outdoors, then focus and attention. So that's really starting to notice the nature, the natural world, the species around you, and then giving people an experience to kind of really go out by themselves and kind of explore, and then collecting and reflecting at the end. So there's a lovely flow, which I found really works in terms of people's journey outdoors. But with the Forest Families, I remember one family, and the children had different challenges and behavioral challenges, and the family had been finding it really, really tough. And the weather was gorgeous, blue skies, sunshine, and it had been for 3 or 4 days, and none of us had come prepared for the terrific thunderstorm and downpour that suddenly fell on the forest. And there was just this moment of shock that had come from absolutely nowhere. And then the children just went wild. And there's this image in my head of the 3 children from about 15 to 7 just dancing in the rain. They just danced and jumped in the puddles and laughed and sang, and the parents just couldn't believe it. And the parents initially was like, we need to go back, we need to get back to our cars. And when they saw their children just coming alive through the raindrops, and then they started to join in, and yeah, it was one of those really amazing experiences where we just all went into a different space with the rain.
I can't believe that we have run out of time, because I have so many more questions around this topic. It's definitely one I think we'll follow up again on one of our online sessions, ladies. This is being recorded, so we will use it. But I think that's a lovely way to end, to think about young people dancing in puddles in the rain. So thank you so much, both of you. I also, just to say, both those projects are funded by National Lottery Community Fund at the moment, isn't that right? And I know you have other funders too. But I just wanted to thank you both very much for your time, and to say we will certainly be talking more to you again. So thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Claudia. Good to meet you, Jenny.
Bye.
Bye.